In 2025, the Caribbean became the stage for the biggest U.S. military buildup in decades. Ships, aircraft, and special forces hit the region to fight Latin American drug cartels. But experts warn there's more at play: a political push against Nicolás Maduro. Today on Conflict Core, we break down Operation Southern Spear, the U.S. strikes, Venezuela's response, and what it could mean for the region. The U.S. has long framed Latin American drug trafficking as a national security threat, a strategy that dates back decades. The militarization of the war on drugs, also known as the War on Cartels, began in 1989 under President George H.W. Bush. That year, Bush introduced a national drug control strategy, emphasizing supply interdiction and involving the Department of Defense, creating the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and formalizing the military's role in detection, training foreign forces, and supporting law enforcement. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney announced plans for a Caribbean counter-narcotics task force, expanded border monitoring, and military training in countries like Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, though U.S. forces were not authorized to make arrests or conduct raids. These early operations laid the groundwork for decades of U.S. involvement in Latin America's anti-drug efforts. Fast forward to 2025. Fentanyl and cocaine trafficking, often linked to Venezuelan and Colombian cartels, became the official reason for a massive U.S. military presence in the southern Caribbean. In August, President Trump deployed the USS Iwo Jima and its amphibious Ready Group, followed in November by the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group. Over 15,000 personnel, including Marines, sailors, and Special Operations Forces, were stationed across the Caribbean and Puerto Rico, the largest deployment since the 1994 Haiti operation. Analysts note that such a buildup not only targets drug cartels but also sends a clear signal to regional governments, hinting at broader strategic objectives and potential political pressure on Nicolás Maduro. The first operation of the campaign came on September 2nd, when U.S. forces sank a vessel allegedly run by the Tren de Aragua gang, killing 11 people. In the following weeks, airstrikes destroyed additional alleged drug smuggling vessels, some allegedly connected to the Colombian National Liberation Army. The Dominican Navy assisted in recovering seized drugs. By early November, the U.S. deployment had become the largest in decades, combining naval, air, and special operations assets. Over the next 2 months, multiple vessels were struck, including boats linked to Colombian groups like the National Liberation Army, ELN. Some strikes killed 2 to 6 people. Others led to seizures of hundreds of cocaine packages. The Dominican Navy even recovered drugs from a destroyed vessel in a joint operation. Trump repeatedly hinted that there's more where that came from, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed further strikes were planned. By mid-October, the campaign expanded. The CIA was authorized for lethal operations on the ground, while B-52s, B-1B bombers, and F-35s conducted patrols and flybys near Venezuela. Venezuela moved fast to respond. President Nicolás Maduro mobilized a militia force numbering more than 4 million, launched expansive naval and air defense exercises, and scrambled fighter jets to patrol dangerously close to U.S. warships. At the same time, Caracas reached out to traditional allies, Russia, China, and Iran, requesting not just aircraft repair support, but advanced radar systems and potentially missile systems to bolster its defenses. The Venezuelan government also sharply condemned the U.S. presence as an illegal and provocative act. In one tense incident, a U.S. destroyer allegedly boarded a Venezuelan tuna boat crew, a move denounced by Caracas as hostile and an infringement on sovereignty. In response to what he called maximum military pressure, Maduro vowed to declare a republic in arms should U.S. forces attack, a constitutional threat to launch an armed struggle to defend Venezuela. With the stakes raised and war rhetoric now center stage, Venezuela signaled that it would not be intimidated. Mobilization, alliances, and open defiance were now part of its strategy. Although the United States publicly frames the operation as a counter-narcotics mission, President Trump formally notified Congress that the campaign qualifies as a non-international armed conflict, targeting what he labeled unlawful combatants. This legal classification technically authorizes the use of lethal force, but it also opens up a major debate in Washington and abroad. Are these actions truly grounded in international law? And just as importantly, who are the individuals being targeted? Legitimate armed actors or civilians involved in trafficking? Human rights groups caution that the U.S. may be crossing into territory that resembles extrajudicial killings, especially if the legal status of those targeted is unclear. Legal scholars point out that this framework could easily be viewed by the international community as an overreach, a move that blurs the line between counter-drug operations and political interference. For many global observers, any escalation won't just look like a security mission. It will appear as a direct challenge to Venezuela's sovereignty, raising the possibility of a broader geopolitical showdown. Even with the large U.S. military buildup in the southern Caribbean, defense analysts point out that the United States does not have the force levels required for a full-scale invasion of Venezuela. Most military experts agree that an occupation of a country this size, with rugged terrain, dense urban centers, and a large loyalist security apparatus, would require well over 100,000 troops, plus months of logistical preparation. Because of this, Washington's real strategy appears to focus on precision pressure, not occupation. Instead of ground forces, the U.S. is leaning heavily on targeted strikes, strategic air power, and overwhelming naval presence to squeeze Maduro's government politically, militarily, and economically. By the middle of October, classified briefings and open-source reports suggested that the mission's objectives were quietly evolving. What began as a counter-narcotics campaign was now being interpreted by analysts as part of a broader regime pressure strategy, with some officials openly discussing the possibility of regime change as an unstated end goal. U.S. planners even evaluated limited strike options inside Venezuelan territory, including radar sites, air defense nodes, and high-value cartel-linked targets. While no major strikes were launched, the fact that these scenarios were being explored shows how quickly the boundary between a drug interdiction operation and direct military coercion was beginning to blur. In strategic terms, this shift signals that the United States may be using naval firepower and long-range aviation, not just to disrupt smuggling routes, but to shape political outcomes in Caracas. It's a high-stakes approach, applying maximum pressure without crossing the threshold into a full-scale war. The U.S. military buildup has sent shockwaves across the Caribbean and Latin America. While some neighboring countries, like Trinidad and Tobago, have joined the United States in joint exercises and intelligence-sharing missions, others are watching the situation with growing unease. Several governments have warned that even a single miscalculation at sea or in the air could ignite a much broader regional confrontation. The deployment of U.S. carriers, long-range aircraft, and special operations units has created a new strategic reality, one in which the Caribbean, usually considered a relatively calm security zone, is now the center of a high-stakes geopolitical standoff. This campaign is also putting significant pressure on U.S. military diplomacy. Washington is attempting to conduct aggressive counter-narcotics operations while avoiding a trigger that could provoke a direct confrontation with Venezuela or with its global partners. Moscow was quick to react. Russian President Vladimir Putin condemned the U.S. naval deployment as an act of destabilization and pledged to strengthen military technical cooperation with Caracas. Russian officials hinted at accelerating shipments of radar upgrades, air defense components, and aircraft maintenance support to the Venezuelan armed forces. For the Kremlin, the U.S. buildup is seen as a challenge to Russia's influence in Latin America, a region Moscow increasingly views as a strategic counterbalance to NATO activities in Eastern Europe. China has also expressed concern, calling for respect for Venezuelan sovereignty, while Iran, already deepening ties with Caracas, signaled support for any nation facing what it called U.S. aggression. This coalition of international actors has heightened fears that the Caribbean crisis could quickly widen beyond a simple anti-cartel mission. Taken together, the situation has become one of the most complex military-political flashpoints the region has seen in decades. Every move by the United States, Venezuela, or their global partners carries the risk of miscalculation, and the consequences of even a small mistake could ripple far beyond the Caribbean basin. Operation Southern Spear is ongoing, and the Caribbean has never been this tense. Officially, it's about stopping drugs, monsieur. The experts warn it may be a covert campaign for political leverage. Will it work, or spark a larger conflict? Only time will tell. Subscribe to Conflict Core to stay on the front lines of geopolitics and hit the bell icon, because this story is just getting started.